listener production.
Hey, Helen Smith here with you for this bonus episode of The Briefing. Tesla has announced Australia and New Zealand will become the first global right-hand side drive markets to activate their full self-driving supervised technology. The semi-autonomous feature is set to roll out to customers very soon, with Tesla's Model 3 and Y vehicles being the first to get the self-driving tech, as these models are fitted with the company's latest hardware for computer, with many of them already having the software installed, as it's offered as an extra option for $10,100 at the time of purchase. But for those who didn't select the extra, there's also a subscription model and 30-day free trial coming soon. Now, in Australia, under current legislation, autonomous or driverless vehicles are prohibited by approximately 700 rules. But Tesla insists their new system falls under a Level 2 function, according to the Society of Automotive Engines driving scale. So the scale defines 6 levels of driving automation, ranging from 0, being fully manual, to 5, which is fully autonomous. Vehicles categorised as Level 2 are compliant with Australian law, but are a contentious point when it comes to advanced driver assistance systems, as there's a fine line between Level 2 and Level 3 vehicles, which are regarded as automated driving systems and aren't compliant with Australian regulations. And Tesla's tech being rolled out in Australia is capable of completing a door-to-door journey, including negotiating traffic, hazards, and varying road conditions, without the driver touching pedals or the steering wheel, which some experts say makes the vehicle a Level 3 on the scale. Which has got people talking, asking how Tesla categorised the feature as Level 2, with Tesla yet to make comment. So with all of this in mind, what would driverless cars look like on our roads, and do we have the infrastructure for it? I spoke with Professor Michael Milford, Director of QUT's Centre for Robotics, before the announcement to unpack the development of autonomous vehicle technology here in Australia. Michael, how far off in Australia are we to having driverless cars on our roads as part of everyday life?
We could have driverless cars theoretically any time now. There's a couple of key considerations. The first is the whole regulatory and legal setup that has to be all ready and fit for purpose. A lot of progress has been made, but there's still some work to be done. The second and possibly most critical component is you need a major operator of robotaxis to be interested in and wanting to come into the Australian market. And so far, that hasn't yet happened at scale.
So do we have the tech and, more importantly, the infrastructure for driverless cars right now?
So any technology should theoretically not need much extra support, if any. And so the idea with robotaxis and autonomous vehicles has always been that they could come into existing Australian cities and roads and not really require governments to install a whole bunch of extra costly infrastructure. So I just got back from Los Angeles in the States, where I rode extensively in the Waymo robotaxis and got to really experience that. I've been riding autonomous vehicles for over a decade, but these were truly incredible to ride in. And one thing you notice is that they're operating on normal Los Angeles streets in the area that they operate. There haven't been a lot of changes made to the roads or anything like that. They basically just fit into the existing road network.
In Australia, we, like LA, I guess, we drive a lot. Does our geography complicate things?
One of the differences between America at large and Australia is Australia has a lot more sparsely populated regional areas, but we still have lots of transport needs in those areas. And so autonomous vehicles are a commercially orientated technology in many ways. They need to earn money. And so they're naturally targeting those really dense urban environments like San Francisco and Los Angeles. One of the particular problems to Australia is we really want to make sure that we have a transport service that's available in rural and remote areas. And that's one of the areas that perhaps autonomous vehicles haven't had as much practice in, so to speak.
Moving on to some of Australia's current road laws and safety regulations when it comes to autonomous vehicles, are we starting from scratch legally? We will need to introduce a lot of laws and regulations? Do we already have some in place?
No, we do need to do a lot of work, and a lot of the work has been done. So over the last few years, especially the national and state governments, especially the areas relating to transport, have done a pretty extensive review of the laws and regulations, and of course discovered that, surprise, surprise, we weren't really ready for game time if autonomous vehicles suddenly turned up in large numbers in Australia. So the good news is there's been a lot of progress. Last year, there was an announcement of an automated vehicle safety law. The organisations involved are places like the National Transport Commission and, of course, the state and territory transport-related government departments. So they've all been working together to progress that. We're still not at the stage, as per my understanding, where you could just suddenly dump 1 million autonomous robotaxis, but we are much, much further ahead than we were 5 years ago.
So what happens if somebody crashes? Well, I guess if an autonomous vehicle crashes, who is liable?
So this is one of the important questions. And so you can consider there's really three parties involved. There's the person who is nominally using the vehicle, even if they can't really control it. There's a person who perhaps owns the vehicle, especially if it's a private autonomous vehicle. And then there's the company or operator of the rideshare fleet, if it's one of those central robotaxi fleets like we have in America. My understanding is that most of the responsibility will be on the central operator, where you jump in a robotaxi just like you jump in a taxi or an Uber. But again, the exact final details of how that will look in Australia, especially as you cross state boundaries, for example, are still to be finalised.
And like an Uber or taxi that you can just jump into, if you're jumping into one of these driverless cars, do you need a license to drive a car?
So I can speak to the experience I had just last month in Los Angeles. I don't know if that would be the final model, but it was very impressive for what it was. Basically, you just needed to have an app on your phone, just like you need an app for Uber, and you could book a car, it would turn up, you'd jump into it. I think I saw teenagers and people who perhaps did not have licenses using the service while I was over there, so I don't think they necessarily would have to have a license. I think having a license being a prerequisite is something that carries over from when people were expected to intervene if the car did something wrong. Nowadays, in those more mature services like Waymo is operating, the passengers definitely can't intervene. And in fact, you're regularly told to not touch the steering wheel. And some of the vehicles, some of the other operators using don't even have a steering wheel. And so you couldn't intervene even if you wanted to.
Moving back to some of the tech that's being used in these vehicles, where are we seeing it already being used in Australia and other industries?
So one thing that is still not perhaps widely known is that Australia genuinely led the world in the development of autonomous vehicle technology, but not in robotaxis initially. This was done in mining 10 or 20 years ago to automate both the underground mining trucks and also the mining trucks that operate above ground. And that's a technology that is relatively widespread in Australia and also through the world. And Australian researchers played a key role in developing that tech. Some of that tech is very similar to the tech that you'd see on a robotaxi operating on the roads, but obviously operating on public roads is a little bit different to operating deep underground in a mine. So there's been a bunch of additional work done on top of that.
If we were leading the way with this tech in the mining example that you just said, why are we so far behind in getting these driverless cars or the autonomous taxis on our roads compared to other countries?
So it's always interesting to see Australia as a relatively affluent, quite progressive country in terms of technology, but the rate at which we adopt different technologies does vary. Sometimes we lead the curve and sometimes we're a little bit behind. So I think the reason for us perhaps being a little bit behind in terms of large-scale rollouts of robotaxis, it's nothing to do with the technological talent or the interest in Australia. Again, I think this is probably primarily related to, for whatever reason, these big companies that are operating these autonomous vehicle fleets overseas have not yet seen sufficient reason to propose and come into Australia yet.
Do you think Australians have a bit of a negative attitude towards driverless cars, autonomous vehicles, or even just EVs, for example? Do you think that might be also part of the reason that we're being slow adopters?
I don't think Australians are particularly pessimistic, and I do like the skeptical attitude of a lot of Australians. We should always be cautious and skeptical regarding new technologies. I think first and foremost, if you mention things like autonomous vehicles and electric vehicles, some of it's just basic familiarity, and that's solved fairly quickly over time. And so if you take the examples of electric vehicles, which are a little bit more progressed in terms of the technology and rolling out in Australia, I think the average Australian is a lot more informed and open to things like electric vehicles than they were just a few years ago. And some of that's just familiarity, the fact that the price points have come down, the fact that there's now a number of different brands you can buy in Australia, and the fact that their friend bought one and they went in it and were reasonably impressed. We don't have that yet with autonomous vehicles. A lot of the governments and researchers have been working really hard to familiarize people with autonomous vehicle tech. So we've had sort of tours of autonomous vehicle prototypes, and people have generally been pretty receptive and excited about riding in one. So I think as people see more and more of them, they will become more familiar with the technology, and I think it will be fine.
So outside of, Elon Musk's Tesla, which other companies are seriously playing the game when it comes to autonomous vehicles?
That's a great question. If you'd asked who were the key players in autonomous vehicles 5 or 10 years ago, I could have given you a list of hundreds. When the technology was more expensive and took longer to develop, that really consolidated down to just a few small players, ones that had very big bank accounts. Arguably, the leader internationally right now is Waymo, which spun out of Google and has operations in a number of different US cities. There's a small number of other US-based players like Zoox and a few others. There are also automated trucking companies as well. And China has a lot of automated vehicle activity occurring, although I do not know as much of the details about their exact rollouts.
Okay, so big picture, how far off do you think it will be a reality that the average Australian, can jump in an autonomous taxi instead of an Uber?
I think that comes down to whether these things are going to earn enough money. And so the good news is they're widely enough deployed in the USA. They're offering a significant fraction of the rideshare or Ubers and taxis in some of the cities like San Fran and LA. And so those companies have pretty good numbers on whether they think they're going to earn enough money. As soon as they think they are, I suspect there'll be strong interest in moving to Australia. Australia is a very similar market in many respects to the United States, but I would expect it will become pretty clear in the next year or two whether it's going to be profitable enough.
Michael, thank you so much for joining us on The Briefing.
Thanks so much for having me. I always love chatting about this topic.
That was Professor Michael Milford there, Director of the Queensland University of Technology's Centre for Robotics. And that's it for this episode of The Briefing. Before you go, though, we'd love it if you could share this ep with someone else you think might enjoy it as well. It really is one of the easiest ways you can support everything we do here at The Briefing. And you can check us out on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. I'm Helen Smith. Catch you next time.